Well, thank you, Mr. Justin Wu, Head of Asia Pacific at Bloomberg NEF. Now, we've looked at the topic of sustainable finance from the role of national institutional investors through that panel discussion. And now, time to discuss on the role of technology in scaling impact or driving sustainable finance in this panel discussion, which is panel discussion number 6. The panelists for this session are Ms. Samira Khan, Director of Citizenship and Market Development at Microsoft, Mr. Girish Ramachandran, President of Tata Consultancy Services Asia Pacific, Mr. Jonathan Wong, Chief of Technology and Innovation at United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and technologist Mahadhir Aziz, Chief Executive Officer of Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, MDEC. Moderator for this session, she serves as independent director on the boards of several Malaysian public listed companies. She is also the chair of J.A. Russell and Co. Sendirian Berhad. She volunteers as a council member of Climate Governance Malaysia, is passionate about and champions corporate sustainability. She believes in integrated thinking when engaging with the boards and management of the companies that she serves. She is a lawyer by profession, a certified mediator, and in 2011, she obtained her doctorate in Islamic finance. Ladies and gentlemen, moderator for panel discussion number 6, Dr. Tunku Alina Alias, founding member of Climate Governance Malaysia. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Rahim. I bid a warm welcome to our attendees and our panelists this morning, Samira, Girish, Jonathan, and Mahadhir. I'm Alina, and I'm honored to be asked to moderate the conversation of this panel entitled The Role of Technology in Scaling Impact or Driving Sustainable Finance. So we plan to have an open and energetic discussion between a technology provider, corporate consultant, policymaker, and investment agency surrounding our topic. I would also invite attendees to type in the Q&A box your questions as we progress, and I'll try to pick up along the way these questions for our panelists to respond to. So as a warm-up, let me ask everyone just to frame our conversation. Can I invite each of you to share your perspectives on the theme of day 2 of this summit, which is financing the green? So please begin with a quick brief of the work of your organization in this space and share your understanding of sustainable finance in general and specifically with regard to the green. So, Samira, can I invite you to kick off our chat this morning, please?
Thank you so much, Alina. An absolute honor and a pleasure to be here today. So as mentioned earlier, I'm on Microsoft's Citizenship Market Development team. We're really serving as the listening ears of the community and bringing insights and learnings back into the company. We're also the bridge in trying to share more about Microsoft with our communities and the markets in which we operate. It's a part of a broader team called the AI and Sustainability Market Development Team, and we're focused on societal impact, workforce transformation, sustainability, all topics that are very pertinent to the discussion today. As I thought about, the concept of green, admittedly, the first thing that came to mind was planetary outcomes. I think oftentimes when we're engaging in the discussion around green, nowadays it's about immediate environmental outcomes, immediate ecological outcomes. However, you cannot talk about environmental outcomes without appreciating the broader context around sustainable development. And that is the social side or the human outcomes, whether they be diversity and inclusion or workforce transformation or education or jobs. And so the concept coined by Kate Rayworth comes to mind, which is donut economics. if we look at the world, we're bounded by planetary conditions or our natural assets. And all of the inclusive growth or the human outcomes are taking place within these boundaries. So we really have to balance positive and negative impacts around both to have true sustainable development and bring everyone along. So just taking a quick look at Microsoft, we've made commitments around carbon, water, land. We've also heavily invested in the sustainable development goals. And in our very mission is this idea of empowering every organization and every individual to achieve more. So it's this entire concept of how do we bring everyone along on this journey around sustainable development. So it's really not just about the technology, it's also about the investment and the financing that really brings this innovation to life for all.
Lovely, Samira. I loved your metaphor of eyes and ears and bringing insights. And I hear what you say about planetary outcomes. We cannot exclude social and economic outcomes. So yes, lovely. Girish, may I hear from you?
Thank you, Alina. First of all, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me introduce myself. I work for the Tata Group. It's been 27 years since I worked for the group. And the group has been in existence for over 150 years. When ESG was not in fashion during the 150 years, the group essentially started off a program where the parent company is even today held by philanthropic trusts. So that is a little bit of the lineage of the group. And the group's founding father clearly outlaid that what comes from people have to go back to people many times over. So it's all about wealth creation for the society at large. Coming to me, I run the Asia Pacific business of Tata Consultancy Services. Across Asia Pacific, we are around 12 countries with over 40,000 plus employees. But what is interesting also is that I also serve on the executive board of Global Reporting Initiative. It's a pioneer in sustainability reporting. So all of you would know probably about GRI and GRI standards when it comes to reporting. I have some strong thoughts on technology. I just want to put a few thoughts before we start off our discussion. If you look at in the last few years, there was technology in every business. However, in the last 2 years, every business has turned into a technology company. Okay. I hope we get the difference. So I believe that strongly there was a technology in every business. In the last 2 years, we have ensured that every business has turned into a technology company. Okay. So I strongly believe in harnessing that power of technology and innovation to catalyze change and driving sustainable outcomes. Just to give you a quick thing about what TCS does, we have committed ourselves to being net zero by 2030. Okay. And among all the Asia Pacific countries, 7 of the 12 countries will be carbon neutral this year. Okay. So we have taken the lead in TCS. And we've also done some very interesting work, Alina. One is we've actually built a we can measure carbon footprint of companies in partnership with UNGC. Okay. So we're just launching it in Malaysia actually very soon. And we also have built a carbon and lifestyle calculator for individuals and families as well. Okay. So one for employees and families and one for organizations. Okay. We've also built a ESG calculation and comparison tool for enterprises, which I will talk about subsequently. So just wanted to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Girish. I really am admiring of your group that you have this pre-ESG lineage that was founded in philanthropy and wealth creation for the society. I love your founder's philosophy, and particularly your insight that previously tech for business now has turned into every business is a tech business. So that's something I've learned today just in the last 2 minutes. So thank you, Girish. Jonathan, may I invite you?
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to kind of speak with you all today. Just a bit about kind of my organization. I'm the Chief of Technology Innovation at United Nations Commission for Asia Pacific. We're kind of the regional arm of the UN, the Asia Pacific arm. And when I say regional, Asia Pacific is quite a big region, how the UN defines it. So it's as far west as Turkey, far southeast as the Pacific Islands, 62 countries, half the 2/3 of the world's population. So many countries. Now, on what I do, of course, technology innovations in my job title. It's a very broad area. Essentially, I say companies have shareholders, the UN has governments. I advise governments on technology innovation policy. And that could be anything from recently worked with the Cambodian government on their science technology innovation roadmap to work on innovative financing policies and sustainable financing policies in Thailand. So quite broad. On the understanding of sustainable finance, firstly, I think Samira and Girish said it very well, and I agree with their kind of articulation and understanding of the concept. But another way to maybe look at it is think, how is sustainable finance different from traditional finance? Kind of as a simple question. And I think without giving away my age, when I went to business school, they taught me how to make money. You know, they didn't teach me about the environmental and social impact. When I worked in venture capital, my bonus wasn't linked to my environmental and social impact. It was linked to how much money I was going to make for the company. And I think this is the shift. And the difference between traditional finance and sustainable finance is the shift from looking to invest not for profit, but investing for impact. And by that, I mean, of course, you have to look at the economic side of things as well when making an investment or financing decision. But absolutely integrating environmental impact and as Samira mentioned as well, the importance of integrating social impact as well. And as we call it within the UN, these 3 dimensions of sustainable development, people, planet, and prosperity are really important. So that's kind of how I think about kind of sustainable finance. Again, moving beyond this profit imperative to looking at social and environmental impact as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're right. This shift is happening right now. We're living through this shift. We're witnessing this shift, and it seems to be accelerating in the past just 2 years, especially under COVID. And I'm sure you've seen quite a lot of it in your work, particularly over in all these regions that you oversee. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from you on this after this. May I invite Mahadhir to share your perspective at this moment?
Hi, thank you, Tunku. I think a lot has been said by my co-panelists and esteemed co-panelists on many aspects on this. I think admittedly what I can say, ESG is a new space that MDEC is partaking with respect to the aligning to the UN SDG and the likes. And I think as recent as maybe 2 months ago that the Prime Minister has announced of at least a big initiative towards going green and the likes. So as a developmental agency that has been doing and promoting and developing the industry along the lines of digital economy, what and how we have to take on that approach was to translate this into the things that we do today. So MDEC today is 25 years old, not literally today, but this year rather. I think one of the big proposition that we are running is called the Multimedia Super Corridor, and I think a lot of you are very familiar of. And there's also announcement for us to revamp and refresh, taking into account and consideration developments that are happening around the globe, specifically on sustainable, specifically on the environmental aspect as well as societal as well. So the approach on how we touch this was that to look at how can we make investments as part investment promotion agency is to look at contextual and purposeful investments that we bring into Malaysia that is primarily sustainable, and it has to be inclusive. So this is our own translation of that and the approach to this. So inclusivity is a must. 25 years ago, you can say that the investments in respect to technology. So Microsoft is also one of the companies that benefited from that and also helped Malaysia develop to where we are today. But the continued investments would be looking into including the micro and small medium enterprises in Malaysia, who made up more than 80% and continue to do that. So we have a lot of, I think we have established at least net zero pathways, but we are looking at some of these companies and MSMEs to play a big part in looking at this together with the investors out there that we intend to bring. So again, I'll touch that as a baseline. I mean, I'm sure there are other things that we want to be able to look at it and how to actually approach sustainable finance towards the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Mahadhir. As a Malaysian, I'm very excited hearing what MDEC is entering into ESG and in a big way too. And I'm also very happy to hear your interpretation of this, that you want to make investments contextual and purposeful, and of course sustainable and inclusive. So I am definitely looking forward to how this rolls out into the future. So, but very briefly, because I am afterwards going to ask each of you to elucidate in depth, but just before that, very briefly, now, what sort of tech are we talking about today? What sort of tech have you come across in the course of your work? Let's put it in the past 2 years, because tech is exponential. So very briefly, if each of you could just share with attendees what sort of tech that you've seen. Mahadhir, why don't you start first? We'll go in reverse order.
Well, I think almost immediately the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated a lot of these things. And we look at this from both the hardware side and also the software side. So the hardware, the use and prevalent and increasing use rather of technologies, technology platforms such as the unmanned aerial vehicles and drones to deliver and to address and to reach certain areas where it would be normally challenging for some of us or humans to actually go there at that rate is something that is driving and allowing and unlocking some other areas that we haven't thought possible, or we think, or we used to think that it should be years away. So the policies and regulations that we need to build is to allow some of that and the leveraging of certain technologies on the hardware side. I would think we have gone into areas such as the autonomous vehicles, although popularly I think people would think about autonomous cars and the Teslas out there. But I think, again, I'm very much grounded in terms of applications of technology. So again, the use of this in living with the pandemic and eventually endemic would be something of interest to me. The other part of this is, I think, the ubiquitous use of technology in what we do. Girish touched a bit about technology in every company. We see it. Digital is the economy today, because today, as we report from a nation, we have the digital economy portion of the pie and then the rest of the GDP and the economy size as a whole. But eventually, as we grow through this, we see that digital is the economy. So that's what we are looking at. E-commerce is contributing and growing at an exponential rate. So that is something that we are looking at in terms of making it sustainable and making this as a new trend on technology.
Yeah, indeed, Mahadhir. On the one hand, it's very exciting, all this new technology. On the other hand, it's also quite scary. So, and you did mention policy. So I want to talk to the policymaker, Jonathan. What about you? What have you seen coming, forward for us now?
I think in terms of technologies that have enabled or can drive sustainable finance, again, going back to the topic of this webinar, I think the first point I will make is always lead with the problem, not the technology. I think it's an important point to make here. And again, to drive sustainable finance, it may not be a technology that drives it. It could be, just as I mentioned, the shift in thinking. So as I mentioned, investing for profit to investing for impact is just kind of an evolution in thought in many ways, but could be a huge revolution in impact, especially for sustainable development. So that would be kind of my main point. But back onto the technology, I think there's two ways of looking at this. One, how can technology increase the supply of finance, and how it can support the demand for finance? And I'll explain what I mean by this. So on the supply of finance, I think it's no surprise to us all. We live in the information age. Information is readily available to all of us now. And I think what this is doing is opening up a broader market of investors. So I could go online now and look at a crowdfunding platform and invest in a fintech startup looking at clean energy, for example. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. It would be institutional investors only who could do that, not kind of retail investors. And us sat at our laptops here today, we couldn't make those sorts of investments. So all these crowdfunding platforms that are coming up, and a lot of them are looking at clean technologies and more investments in the more social forms of enterprise. Certainly that's playing a role. I think Girish mentioned this issue of kind of how tech is used for kind of better, more accurate and real-time data analytics with regards to sustainability as well. And I think certainly this is giving investors, if you like, the assurances to invest in companies and verifying their green credentials, for want of a better word. So I think certainly around the analytics and measurement side, technology is really helping to drive that supply of finance. Now, I also talk about demand for finance. It's all well and good if we have all this sustainable finance out there just waiting to be deployed. But where are all the companies? Where is this money going to be deployed? And I think from that side, of course, we've seen the emergence of a huge clean tech startup market, which is providing these investment opportunities and that, if you like, that demand for capital. And importantly, I think as well, we're seeing these companies becoming ever more financially competitive. Clean tech is nearly, if not kind of the same cost as kind of some of the dirty energy that's, for want of a better word, that's out there at the moment. And with ADB predicting that the global market for clean tech is going to be $1.3 trillion globally and 640 billion in developing countries. I think certainly that demand side helps, and clean tech and the emergence of kind of affordable and accessible clean tech is providing that demand to unlock potentially the supply side of sustainable finance as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. You know what? In preparing for this panel, I was thinking which comes first, right? Chicken and egg. Is it the finance or the tech? Was it the tech or the finance? but I figured out, it has to go in tandem, isn't it? Together. But the challenge for a lot of startups that you mentioned, which is essential, because it is that creativity, the explosion of that sense of there are no borders, that only exists when you don't have much to risk. But for larger companies, it's just too much to risk. So they need that financial support. And yet our panel's talking about tech for finance. But you rightly pointed out, there's also finance for tech is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thanks. Girish, what are your thoughts? You've heard Jonathan and Mahadhir and Samira. What are your thoughts on this?
So, Alina, my view is let's look at the genesis of this, what is happening in the industry. I think there is a genuine push from investors, but more importantly from consumers to drive the ESG agenda for companies. They are the ones, the youngsters are the ones who are essentially pushing the envelope and telling enterprises that they need to be more sustainable, and we will buy products only which are sustainable. Now, if you look at the fundamental problem is collecting of data on carbon emissions. That today is the biggest problem that is there in the industry. People collect data, but essentially today we don't have real-time data available from enterprises. And I really think a few technologies, if they're able to come together, and we build some solutions, I'll speak about the solutions later. But for example, big data and analytics will be a significant part towards moving this. The other one where I see is a lack of trust. Trust, who do we trust in this particular and do we trust the agencies like, for example, GRI, or do we trust somebody else? So that is another issue that is there. And blockchain, for example, could provide some solutions. We are piloting one interesting solution with UN in Geneva on this. Then I also strongly believe IoT and cloud are also driving towards sustainable development. So I can talk a little bit about some of the solutions, but I'll stop it at that. But from a tech point of view, I think data analytics, blockchain, AI, IoT, and the cloud will essentially drive towards more sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks, Girish. Yeah, you're right. This is definitely a consumer-driven type of mind shift, if I may put it that way. I mean, some people will actually call it ideology, ESG.
Yeah.
But I think, more importantly, it's an actual mind shift. And you pointed out some problems, and I will touch on the pain points later, pertaining particularly to data. And all these technologies that you mentioned, AI, blockchain, IoT, cloud, becoming more and more important. So I will ask you more about it. Hopefully, we'll be able to learn. Let's hear from Samira. Samira, you come from the eyes and ears perspective. How do you see that playing out in the ASEAN context?
Yeah, thank you, Alina. So, I've heard a lot about the challenges and the enabling conditions that need to be in place for the technology to be successful. And I think we'll get to some of that later. It is very much a mindset shift and awareness issue, amongst other things. But I think what's been really powerful for me to witness is the number of ESG solutions and impact management technologies that have emerged over the past couple of years. And that really allows organizations to report differently on their impact, to report differently on their outcomes. It also allows companies to tell evidence-based narratives in a different way and to appeal to some of the consumers and the markets that were mentioned earlier. It allows CEOs and leaders to make commitments differently in a much more quantitative manner, and therefore creates a universal language to bring other CEOs and to bring other leaders along. So it's very powerful. I think the devil is in the details around the execution, the data collection, the number of conditions that need to be in place internally and externally for the technology to be successful. So two technologies that I'm very excited about these days, one is Microsoft's Cloud for Sustainability, which really gets to this notion of how do we better record, report, and reduce carbon footprint. So how does an organization do that? On one side, you have the accounting methodology and you have the data, and then all of it is sort of supported by technology. Another thing I'm very excited about on the Microsoft end is this notion of developing a planetary computer that we've committed to. So there's AI involved, critical environmental data sets coming together, et cetera, to really better understand biodiversity. And I think this is extremely important to the region. I know you asked me specifically about the region. If you look at ASEAN and the number of different sort of impacts that the region has had to endure, whether it be sort of around climate change and changing weather patterns, air pollution, water scarcity, water pollution, it's a lot. So I think these types of management tools that help companies and organizations change their business practices are going to be vital. But on a much more positive note, ASEAN has so much natural capital that I think technology really provides a pathway and an opportunity to leapfrog if we think about innovation around the management of resources. And I'll just pause there.
Yeah, thanks, Samira. I've actually come up against this problem that you mentioned tech can address. This is sort of skepticism, particularly amongst the much older generation of directors, whereby they're not quite convinced because to them it's all rhetorical or maybe anecdotal as opposed to being evidence-based. And the fact that tech can actually provide this evidence that allows for effective decision-making, for commitments to be made, and gives that confidence and trust, I think is so important. And on your second point, or your last point, which is the planetary computer for biodiversity, something that is very close to my heart because you cannot speak about climate without talking about biodiversity as well. It goes hand in hand. So that is also not to be forgotten. I am so glad that your company, Microsoft, is looking at this. I'm not quite sure whether the information or the technology will be widely available, particularly to people in ASEAN region. Cost is an issue, but I hope that your company will be able to find a way to allow for that sharing. So let me ask Girish. Girish, you talked about some of these tech that might bring up some business opportunities within our region. Where do you see these opportunities coming? Where are the low-hanging fruits that you think we can take advantage of?
Okay, so Alina, let me give you a quick ground up view of few things what can probably give tangible results. Okay. As we know, the biggest challenge that the world faces, one of the biggest challenges is food security. Okay. And for most part, it's not a supply issue, but it's actually a issue of food wastage. Okay. Today, we produce food which can feed up to 10 billion people in the world. Okay. But we waste so much of food that we have substantial part of the world population which goes hungry every day. Now, if you look at what simple technologies can do, so we did this particular pilot with an Australian retailer. Simple thing, is there a way by which you can put an IoT device when strawberries are plucked from the farm? And is there a way by which you can track strawberries through the entire supply chain and ensure that the right humidity, all the temperature, all of them is maintained so that by the time it reaches the folk, you will get the same freshness. Okay. So this is something using simple IoT and data, we are able to provide this through the entire supply chain. Okay. Another interesting thing that we have done is also with actually a Taiwanese company. As you know, power plants are significantly there. They produce today most of the power plants in the world are coal powered. Okay. And if you look at what can we do with coal powered power plants. Okay. So what we have done is we have created what is called a digital twin for some of these plants. What does a digital twin means? You just take the entire power plant and create a digital part of how it looks. Okay. And then take it into an iPad. Okay. And in the iPad, if you're able to change certain parameters, okay, is there a way by which you can bring in more efficiency in the power plants? Okay. A simple thing like this today we've been able to do, and we've been able to reduce NOx emissions by almost 50% from a coal powered plant. Okay. This is again IoT, data analytics, all of that. Okay. So I really think there are significant opportunities. For example, with one of the UN organizations, on the finance side, we are building an interesting solution on a blockchain where today we are able to finance everything, each and every initiative of this UN organization using a simple coin, okay? A crypto which can be built by them, and the crypto people can buy the crypto at multiple stages, okay, through the entire life cycle. Again, technologies like that can try to solve a lot of problems today. That's why I said that every company today is a tech company, and we have to see how we can embed technology into every firm. Thank you.
Thanks, Girish. Food wastage is a problem in our part of the world. Of course, you can talk about plastics as well. And yes, I think it's important to address this straight on. Tracking strawberries throughout its supply chain using IoT, that's a superb idea. At the end of the day, you have nature to deal with on one hand, and the supply, and then how you want to manage it. So yes, very important, but it all sounds very expensive. So bearing in mind that transition financing is needed, especially amongst developing nations. Mahadhir, in your opinion, are these sustainability-related innovations in ASEAN adequately funded? And whether, depending on your answer, if you say no, what do you think the public-private sector can do to address this issue?
I think, as much as I'd like to speak about ASEAN, let me just bring it down and localize that a bit. As far as Malaysia is concerned, the concept of financing for sustainable efforts, especially aligning it with UN SDGs, is still insufficient at the moment. Concept is very much recent and new. I think a lot of the ministries struggling to interpret and translate that into something that we do nationally. However, I think what is good was that the shared prosperity vision, for example, the My Digital blueprint for digital economy has somewhat aligned itself or themselves rather with the UN SDGs, specifically on the areas that we spoke about, environment and also the society as well. But again, what is can be extracted as evidence from where financing is being done, investment is being done today. Focus has been very much on digitalization or digitization of traditional industries. So I like what Jonathan mentioned about fintech and the fact that now the investment exercise can be done from other areas. Yet we still look at, oh, Singapore is basically the capital of VCs and for ASEAN and the likes. So the idea is not about so much about location, but what to invest. And if I may touch a bit on ASEAN on this, I think traditionally we're looking at optimizing and digitalizing the traditional industries first, and now we're moving towards emerging technologies without making sure or without having a clear plan on how to bring those emerging technologies into solving national issues, environmental issues, and also societal issues. Malaysia is focusing more on jobs at the moment, and as part of the recovery, which is why e-commerce and also gig and sharing economy would be central to how we plan to recover. Yet we are looking at other areas that we have not unlocked yet, tourism, for example, and looking at transportation as well, and bringing digitalization towards that rather than just pure automation. So again, which brings me back to my earlier point about insufficient financing and also support towards this. Again, one area we need to be able to look and compare notes with our ASEAN members and also partners and see how we can do this together with at least a bit more on the transitioning financing as well.
What I'm hearing from everyone is a question of pace, isn't it? Different people have a different pace, and in Malaysia, the awareness has started, and we are focusing on digitalization and digitization, and we do want to move towards the emerging technologies, but we need to take baby steps. So I hope I heard you correctly there, but most importantly, the direction is correct, right? Yeah, I'm glad. We have to take baby steps, but fast. Oh, so let's move on to Jonathan. Jonathan, so Mahadhir spoke of Malaysia, but you have an APAC view, and then I'm asking you specifically pertaining to ASEAN. Do you see that ASEAN's policies as a region, and maybe you might want to choose specific countries as to illustrate. Do you feel that the policies are coordinated enough to push these aspirations, that we're all talking about today? Do you feel there are sufficient instruments being introduced to help incentivize or even deter some bad behavior?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, on this question of kind of whether ASEAN is, as an ecosystem, is I suppose coordinated to push sustainability and indeed sustainable finance or indeed sustainable technology. I go back to what I said of how I think about sustainability. You know, the SDGs have 3 dimensions: social, economic, environmental, people, planet, prosperity. So I think of it not just about green. It has to have that economic value as well. Companies have to make money. You know, they have to be green as well. It's fine. It has to be good society. Very hard to do. I think of sustainability in this way. Now, if you take a step back and you listen, technology has been an incredible driver of innovation and economic dynamism in ASEAN. You know, it's put money in people's pockets. It's created jobs, which is important, as Mahadhir said. And it's pulled millions of people out of poverty. But if you look through the industrial revolutions, you know what? CO2 emissions have been going up in step with the industrial revolutions. Income inequalities are at its highest ever. You know, so arguably, while technology has been good for the economy, maybe not so much for society and the environment, arguably. And as Girish mentioned, every company is now a technology company. So I have it in my mind. And again, I go back to the point I raised earlier. My role is to advise governments on policy. It is how can government policy incentivize businesses and indeed tech businesses in this context to think more social, think more environmental, as well as thinking about profit as well? And that's the key question for me. And we've seen nuggets of things happening in ASEAN. So, for example, I worked with Thailand on the Social Enterprise Act, which as part of this act, there is a royal decree that gives investors who invest in enterprises that have a social and environmental purpose, first and foremost, 100% tax break in that company. Now, when you talk about sustainable finance and investing, as an investor, now you're sat here thinking, okay, do I invest in this company here that maybe is purely for profit, where I'll have to pay tax? Or maybe I take a risk on maybe a lower return or on a company that has a very green mandate at its core. I get 100% tax break there. I think this is where policy can really shift the incentives around investment. And we've seen that in Thailand. And we also see that in Vietnam as well. Now I think another important point is we're speaking about sustainable finance, but not all tech startups need finance, but they do need customers and they do need markets. And I think certainly ASEAN as a market can come together to harmonize and make it easier for tech startups and clean tech startups and sustainable finance to flourish. And I think things like, you can imagine initiatives like, I don't know, specific kind of tax incentives and tax breaks for clean tech companies moving from Malaysia to Thailand, as an example. I mean, these are the sorts of things that could really catalyze the market. Now, on what more ASEAN can do to come together, you know what? We worked with ASEAN a couple of years ago to develop the inclusive business guidelines for ASEAN. Now, this was a set of guidelines that all 10 economic ministers of ASEAN signed up to. So what is an inclusive business? An inclusive business is a business that specifically and deliberately targets the very poorest people with their products and services. Now, I think this is really important, particularly around technology. Now it's hard to believe that there are 4 billion people in Asia and the Pacific. Over 2 billion people do not have access to the internet in the digital world. It's a really striking statistic. I mean, because throughout the pandemic, can any of us imagine we all have access to the internet and the digital world? We wouldn't be able to work, our kids couldn't go to school, we wouldn't be able to trade. You know, it would have been quite catastrophic. So I think kind of seeing ASEAN come together and saying, no, we want businesses to be more inclusive, we want businesses to provide products and services to the very poorest people, was a major step. And it got me thinking, what would it look like if ASEAN came together to have a set of sustainable financing guidelines? What would it look like if ASEAN countries came together and said, you know what, we will give specific tax incentives to clean tech companies to trade within the ASEAN region? This is where I think ASEAN can come together. And to my point earlier, not all companies need finance, but they need customers. There are a lot of customers in ASEAN. You know what I mean? And I think the more we can do that and maybe use the inclusive business guidelines, maybe as a template of how countries can come together on a range of different issues, might be a opportunity to explore and maybe an opportunity to explore as well in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So many levers that can be pulled on. It's a question of getting together and deciding together how to do this. We are running out of time and we have several questions from our attendees. Now, question number one. Samira, maybe you might want to take that. I'll read it out. Digitalization can also contribute to CO2 emissions in processing, i.e. with the rise of cloud data storage and cryptocurrency. What's your opinion on this type of digitalization and the effect they have on our climate? And what are your recommendations in preventing or rectifying them? Yes, very, very, very apt. Samira, give it a stab.
I can respond to that briefly. I think, beyond a doubt, digitalization is going to have an impact on our climate and emissions, and that is absolutely unavoidable. So the question then becomes, is how do we reduce the impact? And it goes back to what I spoke about earlier, the concept of net impact, being able to really measure that impact across, let's say, an organization or a company's assets across the board. You know, companies are producing actual products. There's manufactured sort of capital being used and produced. There might be carbon emissions associated with that. There are also sort of other commitments that a company may be making on the flip side to kind of counteract. So I think we need to think about the entire net positive equation, and companies have to offset the harm, the negative impacts, financially or through co-innovating and partnering with others. So for example, you know, Microsoft has made a commitment transform to net zero, and they've partnered with other CEOs of major companies, recognizing that this problem is not going to go away, but trying to make greater commitments of their assets towards solving the problem. And I mentioned manufactured capital. There's also, you know, partnering or social and relational capital. There's intellectual capital. How do we work with academics to drive the space forward and create new innovations that are geography specific, that are region specific? So there are many different kinds of assets that companies can bring to the table, financial, manufactured, intellectual, to really change the dynamics around innovation. So that's my short response to it, but it's a very important question.
Yeah, thank you, Samira. I think, yeah, that there are things the company can do, and then there are things they cannot do. And what you're saying is, in those instances, collaborate and partner. And basically SDG 17, right? The last SDG, partnerships and collaboration. And I agree with you. You know, you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to make a decision that's strong, you go together, essentially. Thanks, Samira. I'd like to go to question number 4, which Girish, can I invite you to have a go at that? Let me read that. Not only food waste or plastic, actually excessive waste production from linear economy is threatening the environmental quality. How can technology help in the transition to circular economy? Quite a lot of things in there. So
Yeah. So I'll try to make take at it. So if you look at it, let's take, as I said, food waste is not a problem of not enough generating food. There is today more than enough food being generated. It is just that supply chains are weak. If you are able to find out where the bottlenecks are in any of this, whether it is food waste, whether it is excessive plastic or excessive production, if you are able to ensure that supply chains are more dynamic and we are able to ensure that we are able to digitally monitor supply chains so that we are able to get the supply to the demand at the right time. Okay. I think this is essentially the problem that we have, Alina. We have to see how we are able to solve it. Okay. So, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Okay, many of us go and shop in our for our food. Okay, and many of us try and buy exotic foods from Europe, okay, or Latin America. Is a simple step can start from all of us. Okay, if we are able to buy produce from our own neighborhood, okay, and if there is a way by which we can support the neighborhood, okay, that will help us a long way in reducing the footprint. Okay. So, Alina, as you know, carbon footprint, 80% of the carbon footprint of people are only because of 4 things. Okay. One is because of the food that you eat. Second one is the transportation that you have. Okay. Third one is the utilities that you have. And the fourth is what kind of white goods you have at home. Okay. If these 4 can be taken care of, 80% of your footprint can actually be managed. Okay. And if all of us consciously make an attempt towards this, and we are able to monitor this, okay, that's why I said we have brought a software today to actually monitor our carbon footprint for enterprises as well as for individuals. If we're able to do that, we'll be able to move towards the 1.5 degrees which you're talking about. But having said that, the biggest problem is that there is a problem of convergence of standards. There are multiple standards in the world. Okay, I mean, just like we have GRI standards, everybody has multiple standards. These standards have to converge. Okay? And even the ratings, ESG ratings, have to have a common practice. Then we can bring the tech and the people together to solve this. Okay? So essentially, we have to bring all of these things together. And I genuinely believe ASEAN can take a lead in this. Okay? And because the standards have not yet evolved, there is a great opportunity for ASEAN to take a lead at it and build a standard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Girish. I just want to consolidate. I think earlier you mentioned a few pain points, which were trust, data. Now you're talking about standards. We need harmonization. So on the one hand, we should work with all the opportunities, encourage the creativity, but also fix the things that are holding us back. That's what you're saying, isn't it? And then also, what I heard you say is that on an individual level, we can take steps as well, as simple as how the food that we eat, the choice of our transportation, the white goods, that we choose, whether we want energy efficient electric lights or not. It's as simple as that. And then, of course, once you have understood this within yourself, you can then generalize it to your company, to your nation, etc., etc. So it is very wise. I'm trying to have a simpler life, Girish. Very difficult, but I'm trying.
Thank you. We are all trying.
And I have to confess, I do love to travel. So it's a guilty pleasure for me. Whenever I get on a plane, I feel very, very guilty. So I'm not quite sure how that paradox I can handle. So okay. Now the next question is question number 2, and I would like both Jonathan and Mahadhir to see if they might be able to help with this question. So this question is, how do we distinguish a maintainable path for every stakeholder in the sustainable model? What sort of path for every stakeholder? So that's part 1. And part 2, for a long-term evolution to be realized, i.e. mindset and behavioral shift being the first thing that needs to be done, do we make choices based on our respective nations' regulatory practices, or should we opt for a more global standard since we are living in a connected world? So your thoughts, either Jonathan, Mahadhir, jump in first when you're ready.
You're too kind, Mahadhir. That's a really hard question that I'm not sure I fully understand, but let me have a go. I think firstly, Tunku, on your point around feeling guilty around traveling, I'm sure somewhere in Tata they're going to be building a teleporter or a transporter somewhere. So maybe a few years away. But on this question on a sustainable path, let me talk again. Let me speak from kind of a personal perspective as a consumer, and also, as I mentioned, my role as kind of advising governments. Firstly, I think government policy can play a really catalytic role in all of this. You look in some of the Pacific Islands where I work, where Fiji has banned single-use plastics, straight up. I'm from the UK. The government has said by 2030, we'll only produce electric cars. I think these sorts of policies will shift market behavior completely. They're not technology policies. They're not sustainable finance policies. They're just kind of green policies. But I think these sorts of kind of policies will have a huge impact in shifting markets. We're seeing it in the Pacific Islands already. I'm sure we'll see the same in the UK and other countries who have made this commitment around clean transport, and as an example. As a consumer, and I think a few people have made this point, I mean, we all can demand kind of and refuse to buy products that don't have have green credentials or environmental cause, and businesses will listen. Businesses listen to their customers. Their livelihood and existence depends on it. So I think certainly we should all have a role to play on that. On whether we make choices based off kind of local or kind of global standards. As Girish mentioned, that there is no global standard, or should I say there are multiple global standards around ESG investing. And I think that's all right. That we have to recognize we're at a space in time where I'm sure looking back, we'll be seen as the forefathers and foremothers of this whole ESG movement. But we're still in the baby stages. If you look at, say, financial reporting, which has been very well evolved over hundreds and hundreds of years, to the fact now we have companies have very standardized global financial reporting standards. We're not there with ESG yet. That's okay. We need more innovation. So in that respect, I think by legislation, I think countries in specific countries have to listen to their kind of regulatory environment of their own country. There are no global standards yet. Maybe we'll get there first, but I think one step at a time. And as Girish mentioned, kind of doing it by sub-region first, ASEAN would be great. Would be a way of kind of taking that next step forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think one area that we wanted to, at least I want to touch, was very much on whether we, again, do or make our choices based on the localized and government policies or standards and global as well. I would like to see that being somewhat, I think, inclined towards what's available locally, because with that, it comes together with incentives and policies and advantages and benefits that you can immediately reap rather than wait and align for something. I mean, people started buying electric cars before this, and they were available, for example, in our respective countries. But again, the moment they unlock and say and incentivize the purchase of that, then people would just jump on it. Similarly, the use of the I think availability of the infrastructure to be able to support the purchases of those things. But again, if I can take a step backwards to some of the questions that relate to what's available out there, what we have been hearing is the thirst and hunger for data, and this is as essential rather to how we can tell what would be the carbon emission. How are we doing with respect to achieving the net zero or even negative carbon and things like that. So this hunger and thirst for data would ultimately drive up investments into cloud data centers and the likes. So you need to be able to balance those things. And that basically, unfortunately, is a byproduct of this. While we wait for advancements in technologies to somewhat miniaturize data centers or reduce, the need for huge data centers. Otherwise, as you increase the need for this, including the Netflix content, the Disney Plus content and the likes, which is what we are basically leveraging on as we survive the lockdowns and the likes, is that how do we then minimize the increase and expansion of data centers and cloud storage. So again, it's easy to come up and say that, okay, I'll just tweak this lever on this side, but again, we're not getting all the information, and then it's about that balancing act. And I think it's a collective work that we have to do across all governments, not just in ASEAN but globally as well.
Super. Yeah, as you can see, there's so much subtopics even within this small 1 hour panel discussion. So many things to talk about, so many things to discuss. And there are a few questions that we haven't been able to answer, and we are running out of time. So 2 minutes to the end. Can I have from each of you 10 seconds? What takeaway would you leave for our attendees today? So Jonathan, you first, 10 seconds.
Oh, that's hard. I know it's a tech session, but don't always leave with the tech, leave with the problem, would what I say. Thank you.
Thank you. Girish?
Yeah. I think, not all hope is lost. We have to bring in more transparency. As long as all of us are transparent and build trust, we can solve the problems.
Thank you. Samira?
that our sustainable development is going to have a material impact on businesses across industries. So we have to bring financing, partnerships, and innovation to the table together.
Lovely, Samira. And Mahadhir.
Well, if I can summarize this, data is the new oil, digital is the new economy. If anything, invest in data and look at it from a sustainable point of view.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'll wrap up. Sustainable finance that delivers both financial returns as well as societal and environmental benefits is linchpin to the green economy. And of course, it's all about data being the new oil. So thank you very much, panelists. This has been a lovely hour for me. I hope to meet you again. Thank you, attendees, for investing your time, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tunku, Alina, Alias, moderator, for that session, and thank you to all the esteemed panelists for a very engaging and insightful and a very substantive panel discussion. Data is the new oil, digital is the new economy. Plenty of takeaways from that session. Right, ladies and gentlemen, time for our lunch break. It's break time from now until 2:40. And while you're having your break, again, don't forget to drop by our exhibition booth with companies such as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, UN Global Compact CFO Task Force for the SDGs. We have CDP Hong Kong, UN Global Compact Network Singapore, and UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei. Feel free to have a quick chat, say hello to their representative, and you can find out and you can understand how each organization is helping to accelerate the SDGs. And also, just another reminder about our photo booth as you go along in today's program. Access the photo booth by clicking the photo booth tab above here. And don't forget to tag us on social medias at UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei. Use the hashtag GoESG ASEAN 2021 or hashtag SDG Ambition Month. Right, time for lunch break. Coming up at 2:40 will be panel discussion number 7, where we will look at banks as ESG change agents, sustainable finance as sustainability performance pathways. That's coming up at 2:40, panel discussion number 7. So be sure to join us then. In the meantime, if you're having your lunch, enjoy your lunch, enjoy your break. I'll see you right here at Go ESG ASEAN 2021 at 2:40. See you later.